Good afternoon, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us for the 22nd edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit, India's premier platform for deliberating the discourse around sustainability and climate change. As we proceed further, it is my privilege to host you all on behalf of the entire WSDS and TERI family. My name is Monmi Barwa, and I'll be introducing a fantastic line of speakers who all are experts and great leaders in their respective fields for this session, which is enhancing coastal resilience for a sustainable future, managing risk, and building a climate resilient shoreline in India. I would now request Mr. Arup Karant, he is the Senior Disaster Risk Management Specialist at the World Bank, to deliver the opening remarks and framing presentation. The floor is yours, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Anup. I'm the Senior Disaster Risk Management Specialist with the World Bank, based out in Delhi. So, before we, get into the presentation, I think I would like to express my sincere thanks to the team, both with TERI as well as the bank. I've been putting this agenda for a very long time. I know a lot of hard work that has gone behind, putting this session in place. As part of my opening remarks, I think I want to emphasize here on three particular points. I think what we have extensively seen in the last many years are events in the coastline, especially cyclones, tsunamis, and I think there's a lot of risk, that we in general know about it, but there is also a growing understanding of the impacts of sea level rise, etc., which I think is something which is there at the doorstep. Some of these manifestations are generally seen in the coastline. If you travel across, right from West Bengal towards the Run of Kutch, which a couple of us did way back in 2016, where we had an opportunity to travel across the coastline over the period of 44 days. What we realized is that, there's a very less understanding in terms of, how the risk is getting exacerbated at many points. I mean, in some places, yes, there's a lot of development also being happening, but the way the development pathways are actually moving and the kind of, interface it is actually taking place with the ocean surface interaction and the land interaction, I think there's a lot that needs to be, understood better in terms of, looking at putting a kind of a safe regime in place. So before I go to my presentation, which is basically, touching upon some of the latest, work which is being done by several state governments, especially what you see is a lot of work being done in the area of disaster risk management, where a lot of work is deepening in terms of, taking out the last mile connectivity, early warning systems, looking at evacuation roads. So a lot of work being happening on the field, and I'm going to just take you through some of those good examples or practices that has been adopted by a large number of coastal states, starting from West Bengal to Gujarat. It doesn't cover the entire amount of work which is being done by all the agencies, but here just purely from a risk management focus, I'm just going to elaborate on that. There are 3 points which I think is very critical when we look at the long-term development and when we talk about sustainability of the coastline. We are all aware that we are all aware of a long coastline. I think the concept note actually talks in depth about how big is the coastline and the kind of exposure that we have in the coastline, especially in terms of population at risk. But what I would also want to say here is that this coastline is also subjected to a lot of multi-hazards. And I think when we look at hazards, when we talk about cyclone, but cyclone itself is a multi-hazard. It brings in a lot of wind. It brings in a lot of issues around floods, etc. So that's something which we need to really think. Any intervention that we do, whether we do it from an infrastructure point of view, we look in terms of livelihoods, etc. I think has to be driven more in terms of what we know are current risks, but there's also a lot of risks that we are not really sure. Some of them are also not emanating from our coastlines. They may be emanating from distant sources like the tsunamis. What we have seen in 2004, and if you look at in general about the tsunamis that have happened way back in the early 1940s, somewhere around I think the Makran zone, which is very active around Iran. if an event happens there, what effect will that bring onto the coastline is something that one has to really anticipate. So these are not hazards which originate from here, but they originate actually from a long distances. So the interventions are typically to be seen from a multi-hazard, and some of the examples what I'm going to show today are actually looking into those events which are not happened, but they may happen in the future, and how can we accommodate that as part of our design processes. From a DRM perspective, what I mentioned earlier is that there are several measures that have taken place and you would definitely know when you compare Orissa Super Cyclone 99 and when you compare any recent cyclones, though the storm surge has not been so phenomenal, but still you will see there is a huge amount of reduction in the loss of lives, and even the injuries are very less in terms of numbers. But there's also an interesting phenomena that some of the states are facing, especially when you look at one of the cyclones, which was Cyclone Titli. It actually brought in a huge amount of rainfall in Raigad or one of those districts, which resulted into massive landslides. And that is something which that community or the state government wasn't really very aware of, dealing with the landslide risk in Odisha. Similarly, a huge amount of precipitation happening in the coastline of Maharashtra last year, I think also resulted into a large number of landslides. So there is also a kind of, changing dynamics in terms of, how people are now settled in those kind of risk areas, knowingly or unknowingly. But I think what's very important is that as we take this development pathway, we need to strengthen our understanding around it and see how we can build resilience around these communities. The last point I want to touch upon is on a very common understanding that we have a large number of institutions. I think India as a country, we are blessed with large number of institutions. And Sir actually represents from NCCR, we have NIOT, we have INCOIS, and you name it, we have a large number of institutions and doing terrific research work. I think how do we bring that research into practice is always a matter of debate, but I personally believe that if we put up some kind of a mechanism and a kind of a knowledge management system or, some kind of a network, of institutions to start using this database. I think the database is very rich. I mean, the general perception is that we don't have data, but honestly, when I've worked with several projects in the last few years, especially managing a long generation cyclone risk mitigation project, what I've seen is that there is enough data available, but how do you bring that data onto a common platform, make that data sets available to different institutions and make it available in a way they can understand, interpret, use. I think these are all those small little challenges that we can definitely work on. In my opening presentation now, what I essentially want to quickly take through is a series of interventions, that has happened around the coastline. And this is basically, I want to really celebrate the success, that India has achieved. And that's where, I want to leave behind my presentation and go into the discussions. Three broad areas that I'll touch upon is on the existing initiatives taken up by several state governments. I'm touching upon the point on data for coastal resilience because I think this is going to really be a kind of a deal breaker for us. I think if you have good enough data about the current areas and looking into the future, all that sea level rise data, if that is all made available, we can actually start looking in terms of choosing a better development pathway. I'll briefly touch upon that and how this has been bridged over the last couple of years through several ongoing interventions. And the last point is touching upon what coastal resilience should essentially target towards. We have seen Cyclone Phony, and I'm sure many of you have visited Odisha after this particular event. And what it drives home is a very clear message that in 99 super cyclone, was quite terrible. It brought down, I think, the impact was huge. 10,000 people lost lives. But when you look at the 2019 event, it's not to say that these events were similar. They were not similar events because the storm surge really did not happen in a big way. So that was the bigger problem, in 99. The storm surge was a bigger challenge for the state government to actually deal with. Our communities were not aware about it. But this event really did not bring a lot of storm surge. But what it essentially brought down was the entire power system of the state. It took a lot of time for them to really put the power back in place. And what it also did was, all your basic essential services, got actually hit. Hospitals were not working. There are a lot of other, important installations, which were not really working. I mean, the life loss, as I mentioned, wasn't very significant. In addition to that, what we also saw in this particular event was a lot of damage to the housing stock, and which also drives home the message that, though the state has put in a good amount of, mechanism in place to evacuate people, and then they evacuate people in large numbers. And the state has a mechanism today to evacuate, more than 1 million people, if an event has to happen. So they have put up required systems, the communities understand it. But what I'm also trying to say is that the housing stock is something which needs to improve. And that is an area, where I think the state governments, not only Odisha, but a large number of state governments have to really work around it. The overall damage and loss estimates from this particular event, when we computed this over a period of 15-20 days, it was a joint mission done by the ADB, the UN and the World Bank. I think the damage and the loss estimates were close to about $3.7 billion. And there's a lot of money, which needs to be pumped in. And to be honest, this money is not available, for any state to just go back and put it in place to have a kind of a very sound recovery. And recovery, when I say recovery, is also about how do you build back better. And when you look in terms of, how do you build back better, your energy systems have to be built differently from what we have been doing all these years. CDRI, Ria and her team, at CDRI has been working extensively in terms of, how do we do that kind of a shift in terms of building resilience across the power sector. So there are a lot of challenges, but at the same time there is also a way in terms of how do we understand, interpret, and how do we take the knowledge of the best available science in terms of decision making process. So the point I'm touching now is about like a quick summary of several pictures. I mean, I'm going to go into the details of each one of them, but just to tell you in terms of what is really happening in terms of the risk management across the coastline. There is a massive shift in terms of how early warning is generated. I mean, thanks to the science and technology, thanks to Indian Meteorological Department, a host of agencies who are working on this in terms of processing data real time, exactly knowing where the landfall is going to happen. The real challenge is that how do you communicate this information to all the stakeholders? And what has been done in the last 2 decades or so is actually strengthening the dissemination system. I think we have done good amount of credible work in terms of the modeling aspect of the cyclone track, etc. We are also good in terms of using the data that comes from INCOIS. INCOIS gives you the modeling results for the storm surge, and then the model also tells in terms of how the inundation is going to happen. So this is not happening 20 years ago, but what we see now is that we are able to pinpoint, accurately tell where the water is going to actually land. And for the last 8 years, NDMA under the National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project has been able to actually demonstrate this for the last 8 cyclones. Very soon, this application is going to be made available to people in their hand through a mobile application. Hopefully, in the next event, in the month of March, this particular application will be launched. There are several ways to reach people, and what you see here is pictures which talks about putting this kind of siren strobe lights, which reaches out to communities in far-flung areas of the coastline where the information actually reaches from the State Emergency Operations Center to the District Emergency Operations Center and to the Taluka Emergency Operations Center, and the trigger of this information actually flows down through a standard operating procedure. That's all in the land, but a lot of people are in the sea, and you would always see that, you'll always hear that, so many fishermen are missing. And this is also a kind of a intervention that is required. On the landward side, yes, I mean, there are many systems available, but how do you actually take this message to a large number of fishermen who are in the sea? Tamil Nadu and many other states have actually exhibited in terms of how this can be possible. There are about 26,000 vessels right now in Tamil Nadu, which are actually part of this early warning system integration. They're all registered vessels. And what essentially is done is a 3-layered approach in terms of, how do you reach to people in that different zones, because you have different kind of units running in the sea. Some people actually go for a very long duration. So by the time the cyclone onset happens and the mechanism starts, and by the time they have to come back to the shore, I think it's just impossible for them to actually reach, because they're out there for 15 days or 14 days. So there are multiple systems now available through mobile networks, through VHF support, etc. And by putting these transponders in those machines, in those vehicles, you can actually reach out to them. It's not just that, this also helps them in their normal time in terms of there is some kind of an issue with a particular boat, they can actually connect through a small network and they can take help from the neighboring operators. There are a lot of other interesting things in terms of how Tamil Nadu is moving in terms of, putting this dashboard to the fishermen. So fishermen, if you just tell them that I'm giving an application for early warning, it may not be sounding very exciting to them. It's also important to look in terms of can we build up all other databases, and provide something which is very unique and they can use it in the normal time. So this is an application called Tundil, which actually brings all data sets together. And thanks to the way, how the systems operate, it's data coming from INCOIS, data coming from multiple agencies, all getting fused. And that is what is required for a fisherman to actually see on the mobile device. So these are all initiatives taken by the government of Tamil Nadu. And what you see there are, long-standing tower masts, which actually relay information way into the sea. And the way how these systems are now getting designed is that particular tower, what you see here, has been designed actually for a 300-kilometer impact. So that is again, trying to look in terms of how do you build in that engineering understanding in terms of, putting critical infrastructure, which can be robust and it can also sustain those kind of, wind speeds. As I mentioned in my opening remarks that, Odisha has now achieved, moving close to about 1.5 million people. Where do they go? I mean, they all have to be there in a safe place. So a large number of cyclone shelters are dotted across the coastline today where people actually are evacuated. They're evacuated in a way that they can remain there for a couple of days. And the way it is also designed is very unique because it takes into account of the probable storm surge. It takes into account of, the possible, inundation, which has been, brought from historical records. And what you see there are plinth levels, which are actually designed with the freeboard, so that in case of a worst case scenario, this place doesn't get inundated, because you don't want people to be evacuated and then evacuate them. It's not possible, because it's highly impossible to move them. So some of these photographs, what you see at the bottom, you also have issues where people come with their livestock. Now, you can't say that I will not create a system for livestock. So in Sundarbans, where there is a huge amount of livestock and where the surge potential is extraordinary, it can be as high as, I think, more than 10 feet, 16 feet. It can even go much beyond that. The credible information that is available today has been used in terms of, deciding what should be the plinth levels and whether we move, animals into that stock. So resilient electrical network, as I mentioned, electrical network failures are very significant. What you see here is also a lot of work being done on the coastline, especially in the cities where the cables are taken underground. It's also important to look at, the agricultural land to protect it from, the intrusion of the sea water. So there's a lot of work being done. The pictures, what you see there above, that's taken last week. This is from a place very close to Karwar, a place called Manikatta, where 500 farmers do joint farming. And there's a very unique paddy that they grow, and it grows in a particular pH value. So, I mean, they need to maintain a particular pH to grow it. So when we designed this embankment, we had to get into a lot of understanding of, what has to be grown, how it has to be grown, working with the farmer association, and then finally designing an embankment where there is a huge amount of change in terms of productivity to a tune of about 400%. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that there are several such embankments across the country which needs, urgent repairs, which requires, a good amount of, design considerations. And it has to be also seen from a long-term perspective, because what you design today is going to be there for another 30, 40 years, or maybe even more than that. Now, if you say that there's an additional layer of risk that need to be brought into it, is at this point of time, when you design that infrastructure, you need to look in terms of the adaptive, measures that you need to factor in the design itself. So these are some examples. The one that you see at the bottom is an embankment which has taken almost 4 cyclone hits. It's still working very well. No major issues there. Evacuation and building roads and, putting bridges are again important to move people from the harm way. What you see there on the top is a picture from a place called Devasima. This place was impacted by a 1977. There was a super cyclone, that happened. It killed about close to 10,000 people there, in Andhra Pradesh then. And under the cyclone project, we were able to finally put in a kind of a bridge for evacuating those people. Those small little islands, where people still stay, but should an event of that thing happen again, you need to figure out how do you facilitate evacuation processes. In addition to that, a lot of work on housing, community infrastructure, strengthening. I mean, these are some of the pictures that are taken after a disaster. These are post-recovery project photographs from Odisha, from Pondicherry and some of the other places. But just to emphasize that, what you need to build back has to be built back better, taking into consideration of the risk information. Same thing goes for a large number of cities and towns. We have dotted, large number of cities and towns across the coastline. But what you need there is, again, a lot of work in terms of, strengthening their infrastructure assets, looking at, livelihoods, etc. These are pictures from Andhra Pradesh, where a lot of work happened after the cyclone Hudud in terms of restoration of the environmental services, because the biggest impact is also on the environment, when these big events happen. So how do you restore it back? How do you put that back in track? What is the kind of plan? What kind of livelihood interventions can be brought in? How do you dovetail existing government programs in terms of, the restoration of the environment services through the recovery projects is exhibited and demonstrated. Again, fisheries, very important sector to be looked at. Their needs are so different. And we've been working with them for the last decade or so. And you realize how complicated it is to look at the entire chain, value chain systems, etc. But these are some of the pictures, again, looking in terms of strengthening their assets. And what you've done phenomenally, at least in 2 states, both in Andhra Pradesh, in Tamil Nadu and in Puducherry, which we were discussing with Ramana Murthy sir prior we started, was to put up a kind of an ecosystem-based resource management. The resource is dwindling a lot in the sea, and this is what the fishermen actually talk about. So bringing in the right amount of knowledge management tools and, co-management of fisheries through a kind of a, 4-stage system is what has been exhibited, demonstrated. And a lot of, new livelihood interventions, alternate livelihood options are something which are being worked out with the fisher communities. So standard practice, in terms of, how do you strengthen emergency response? This is again very critical. I mean, these events will continue to happen. So you need to also look in terms of strengthening the coastal fire stations, building up the capacity of the state disaster response force, having the right amount of volunteers trained in particular skills, swimming, first aid, all those things are required. So these are things, which are also exhibited, done in the programs, and also taking the community support and, making sure that they understand, how they need to act should early warning be disseminated to them. A few more slides, just to also say that when we look at all these interventions, it's also important to build institutions. And I think there are some very interesting examples from the Coastal Zone Management Project, where institutions like the Society of Integrated Coastal Zone Management, the NCSCM, etc., are developed. They are all capable today in terms of how they look at the coastline and do analysis. Building the capacity on engineers training, the officers training. I mean, this is a never-ending process, and there is a lot of work being done, and it needs to be continued with institutions like NIDM and others. But this is one big program that we have been supporting for the last decade or so through our ongoing interventions. Quickly on the data part, I think just to say that we have enough data, but what you need is bring this data together and make it dynamic, make it available real time. I think what is really challenging is that when a cyclone happens, can this database be made available real time, and can institution use it? Now, after 8 years of work with multiple institutions, we are now able to put a kind of a dynamic system in place. This works, real time. It produces all kind of analysis results, and it actually enables the state government to start taking decisions, both not only from an emergency management perspective, but also to look in terms of where do I put my next road. If I have to put it, what should be the level of that road, etc. Because it actually builds in a lot of data which is available in several institutions, but can we bring that in a common resolution? I mean, this is a tool which is developed, and it's now being operational, worked by several state governments. Some pictures taken from real events. These are pictures from the flood module. There are a lot of other modules, can't go into all the details. But what we are now emphasizing is to build the sea level rise module inside this. We don't want to create a new tool. Use the existing tool and look at global data sets and try to bring in that information into the same tool, so that we have one common tool operated in multiple institutions, and people can start taking decisions. Also looking in terms of how the future flood may affect. I mean, there are a lot of studies being done through the cyclone risk mitigation project. We are picking up cities to look in terms of how their infrastructure can get exposed, and it also gives an understanding in terms of if I have to do any mitigation option either through any of the government schemes or ongoing interventions, we are able to pick up that particular thread of infrastructure and start strengthening it. Similarly, Tamil Nadu has put in place a kind of a tool called TN Smart, which is available in the hands of the people. They can understand the event as it happens, and it also gives you information on systematic information on alerts, etc. A lot of other things that we have been involved in the bank, in terms of how we can actually build up all this system, but make it available at the level of the institutions to start using it for decision-making process. So last slides, just to touch upon in terms of how we are emphasizing in terms of, looking at coastal resilience, and based on our decade of experience working with at least 8 state governments, what we have seen is that you can really have a kind of an engagement which is long-term. It can't be, something that you just think about doing in a year or so. I mean, if you look at a 10-year kind of a program design, you can actually systematically build in capacities of communities and institutions, and really house in good amount of capability to deal with these kind of events, which are quite chaotic, in today's world. We are increasingly looking in terms of building resilience across 4 or 5 engagements. One is looking at how we look at hazard reduction, coastal protection, land use regulations. Not much has been done, I should say that. We need to emphasize and do a lot around this area. Impact reduction, and also looking in terms of there will be some amount of residual risk. We can't make risk as zero. There will be residual risk, and that residual risk need to be understood, and we need to appreciate that, and also look in terms of how we can have better systems around it. So the new generation program that we are now designing, and this is where I think we are also collaborating with a large number of institutions, both technical institutions and government institutions and communities, is to look at designing a program for the coastline, looking at issues of not just life saving, but also looking at loss reduction in several sectors. Make sure that data is available. We're looking in terms of establishing something like a coastal observatory, like the urban observatory, which is now available here with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Elevation. I mean, they have this fantastic mechanism where data sets are all coming together in one common place. So we need to think whether we can design something like that. Addressing climate change and multi-hazard risk is very critical. Crowding in knowledge, as I mentioned, there is enough knowledge, but it's important to put up a kind of a working platform. Cross-learning action across states. I think each state has so much of information and their own experience. Like Orissa, I think Orissa can actually tell what probably Maharashtra or Gujarat should do in terms of cyclone preparedness, or maybe those states can actually bring in their own experience and talk to other states. So that's a platform that need to be put in place, and some demonstration investments have to be put across. My colleague Ignacio, who will be there, also touch base today on what is happening in Bangladesh. And with that, I close my opening presentation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir, for giving us a background of building a climate resilient shoreline in India. This session brings together key stakeholders to highlight concrete implementation for climate solutions based on lessons learned on the ground and the latest science to contribute to a net zero and nature positive future while enhancing adaptation and resilience, building of ecosystems and coastal communities. For this, we have a panel discussion and which will be shared by Dr. MV Ramana Murthy, who is a scientist, G and director at the National Center for Coastal Research, that is NCCR of Ministry of Earth Sciences. We welcome you. We are also happy to have our distinguished line of speakers, Dr. Sumit Sharma, who is a program officer at the United Nations Environment Program, that is UNEP, Ms. Rahiman, who is a lead at Infrastructure for Resilient Island States, IRIS, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI, Mr. Arup Karant, who is a senior disaster risk management specialist at the World Bank. We also have two speakers who are joining us virtually. That is Dr. KJ Ramesh, who is a former DG Indian Meteorological Department of Ministry of Earth Sciences at Government of India. And we also have Mr. Ignacio Urrutia, who is a senior disaster risk management specialist at the World Bank. I now invite Dr. MV Ramana Murthy and other speakers to kindly proceed at the dais and start with the session.
So, good evening to all. And first of all, I thank World Bank, TERI, for this inviting me for this important session on the enhancing coastal resilience for sustainable future. In fact, it's very important in the light of climate change. And I'm happy to be part of with Mr. Arup, with whom I worked a very long time. In fact, I saw when he was telling about what to be done for the future for that. But when we look at the context for this particular session, it was rightly said by him how we should go further for that. I need not have to much elaborate on that, but to highlight few issues which are very important. The data which is important for either it is any disaster, it should be come in one place and then we should be in a position to disseminate and use rightly for that. In fact, he was talking about Tundil. He may not be knowing ECL Tundil app was developed by NCCR. It was given to the fisherman community when we had a cyclone of Woki in Andhra Pradesh. In fact, Dr. KJ Ramesh, who is the DG IMD, he knows that the last mile connectivity was the problem. So having noticed that, we had developed this app and then entire information from the fisherman, all the ports will come to the desktop of Tamil Nadu government. In fact, what he was talking about, TN Smart, of late, Ministry of Earth Sciences with IMD and NCMR developed, and then IITM Pune, we have developed an early warning system for the coastal floods. In fact, that is put in operation in Chennai and Mumbai. It is not only the warning system, but also the next stage, which he has mentioned about that, how do we make it more resilient for that? Our infrastructure is not capable of taking up this extreme event, especially when you have a precipitation of 40 centimeters happening in 3 days' time. Our cities can accommodate this kind of precipitation? That was one of the major issues which we are facing for that. If you want to develop urban cities in terms of improvement in the drainage system, that need to be addressed if you want to do it in the long term. Though we have a urban flood warning system called iFlows, which was set for both Mumbai as well as Chennai, but still we have a difficulty in how this infrastructure can do that. Then other area, I think cyclone, much he has talked about that we have a cyclone both east coast and west coast. But of the late, our data shows the cyclones in west coast has increased very high, especially to the 0.5 to 1.5%. That's why you see more cyclones in the Arabian Sea when compared to the, of course, we know that Bay of Bengal has cyclones for that. The other area which is important, which is slow in phenomena, is coastal erosion. Though we say that it comes once in a year, but huge land has been lost, and then many of the fishermen communities are subjected to the threat due to the coastal erosion. As on date, West Bengal is the highly affected by the coastal erosion. We have 60% of the coastline is subjected to erosion, followed by Pondicherry 57%, and then Kerala 45%. These are all the statistics which he was talking about, that most of the information is already available in the public domain, which anybody can access from NCCR website. The other area is the coastal flooding, and which is very common in most of the coastal cities like Mumbai or floods or Chennai flood or Kerala, what we have for that. When we have such kind of floods, even we have to look at something on the dam, how do we regulate this flood water which is coming to the coastal areas for that. It is not only in that areas, I think Dr. Smith will tell more about on other side of the pollution and ecosystem, how they are being impacted by the climate change. Of course, due to the local one, but also due to the oxygen minimum zones, which are very common in west coast of India. When we don't have a proper oxygen in that area, fisheries and fish catch is going to be affected due to the climate change. Hopefully, I think he will address something on that. The last but not the least, sea level rise impact has been noticed at every place. If you see in many of the cliffs in worldwide, either in Europe or in Australia, many of the buildings are subjected to the damage due to the sea level rise, and then extreme events which comes at many parts of the world. But a lot more to be done. What are the priorities to be done when we discuss in the panel is, the priority one is understanding the disaster risk. How do we map the risk along that? That is where what Arup is telling about information which should be available for the public. Second one is the strengthening of the governance, right from the federal level or central level to the state level, even for the NGOs, how do they play important role in terms of strengthening of governance for disaster management? Of course, NDMA does that, but a lot more support is required from the state governments for that. Then third, which is important priority, is the investment. How much we invest at present, and then future, how we are going to channelize or prioritize our investment for the disaster risk management. Last one is the communication, which he has talked about, that even though we have all the systems in place, if we could not able to communicate properly to the public, that is going to be a major disaster. These are also some of the issues which I feel relevant, because one or other likes to work with the bank as well as TERI and then others. And I think Ms. Riya will tell more about the island currents. When we visited recently Lakshadweep, many of the areas are subjected to the sea level rise impact in terms of flooding, because they are just 3 meters above the mean sea level. If something happens on the island, that need to be taken care more in terms of our preparedness. Either we need to keep that much of population in that area, or we wanted to rehabilitate at some other place for that. In fact, NDMA is coming up with a policy of rehabilitation and then mitigation measures. In fact, I am also part of that. How do we design a rehabilitation policy or even for mitigation? It doesn't mean that all the places we can ask people to go out of that area, because the livelihood of the fisherman depends on the coast. It is extremely difficult if you want to rehabilitate the people from the coastal areas to other side. We have to work out a mechanism or nature-based solution. How do we address these things? That these are all my initial remarks, but I will request the panelist. I think we have with our panelist, first panelist is Dr. KJ Ramesh. He is a former Director General in Indian Meteorological Department. In fact, all know that IMD forecast cyclones, flash flood. In fact, for today context, maybe he is a member of the RIMES also in addressing many of the flash floods. In fact, I am working with him for the flood warning, which was set for the Mumbai. Now it is in the operation. I request Dr. KJ Ramesh to take over and then share his views. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ramana Murthy, Arup, and other panelists, co-panelists. It is an extremely important issue which has been flagged for a discussion. So building coastal resilience ultimately is an important factor, but level of resilience that has to be built depends upon the risk we are going to have presently and in the future. So part of the risk assessment activities currently taken up and briefly addressed in some states have been very well flagged and captured by Anup in his presentation, but a lot more needs to be done. In this particular factor, first thing is protecting the shoreline from erosion, which NCCR is working on shoreline mapping, shoreline monitoring, wherever erosion is high, restoring the beaches like Puducherry. So all those things have to happen in a big way. So protecting the coastline becomes very, very important in the existing present context. And Sagarmala, we are putting so much investment in the coastal areas, making those investments fully resilient for the future risks becomes high priority. Now we need to design even coastal highways. Expansion from 4-lane to 8-lane, 6-lane is happening. And at the same time, we are also building all-weather approach roads to coastal habitations and villages. So even our irrigation systems, canal systems, drainage systems have to be redesigned to carry higher capacities of water discharge from the rivers in the future, and the inundation associated discharge. So coming with all these factors, we need to also understand the growing risk which we have to deal with in future. Remember, already we are at 1.2 degrees warming happening. So that has made atmosphere to hold 7% higher moisture on an average. This is a global phenomena. So if 7% more water is going to be there with 1 degree warming, cyclone case and thunderstorms case, warming could be 3 to 6 degrees, depending upon the core of the cyclone around the cyclone eye, etc. So if 6 degrees higher, for example, warming is there compared to Vampur sector of the cyclone to the present, so it can definitely hold at least 30 to 40% higher moisture to the present level. So that means much stronger, intense rain spells with heavy rain rates more than 10 centimeters per hour. So it cannot. Already we are seeing in monsoon, several places we are seeing 5 to 8 centimeters per hour rainfall events are almost happening in every season now. Already we are seeing last 3-4 seasons. Cyclone case, definitely it is going to be more than 10 centimeter per hour intensity rainfall. So these are this kind of heavy rainfall events which we will have to deal, associated with the storm surge from the sea and the river discharges from the uplands. So these things got to be accounted. So here you need a only storm surge model is not enough. Rainfall volume, you have to account for it. Upstream discharges from the rivers, you will have to deal for it. You need dynamic composite risk. You talked about it. For that, you need a dynamic models also readily available, at least in major rivers in the coastal zones. So, and coastal subsidence from the sediment coming from the rivers becomes very important, because we are already seeing subsidence in many of the coastal deltas because of the sediment loading. So this is another factor which has to be seen about the coastal zone vulnerability reduction in terms of physical sense. So apart from the intensity of the cyclones and their associated strength, impacts got to be anticipated. So IMD is working on the impact-based forecasting, so that each segment on the ground, each attribute on the ground, what could be the likely impact and zone of impact and time of impact, and all those factors which are required for assessing the damage, anticipating the damage in advance, so that loss of reduction in the economic point of view, socio-economic point of view, and infrastructure point of view can be taken apart from the minimizing the loss of life by emergency response and other things. So asset management, economic impact got to be minimized in future. Infrastructure resilience is already flagged, but it is a highly challenging thing. Ensuring the sustainability of our lifeline infrastructure should be the high priority of all our developmental projects, which we are designing today and going to design for next 10 years or so. So these are some of the things. Intensities are going to be higher, and area of influence of the coastal zones are going to be much larger compared to the present scenario. The kind of impacts which are not seen so far can become common in the years to come in the coastal areas, and high density population is there in coastal areas. So that is what is to be kept in mind. And the new impact which we are seeing from multi-hazards point of view is stronger cyclones are also not only the threat for the communities, even the intense thunderstorms during summer and non-cyclone seasons, monsoon seasons are associated with high impact and strong lightning associated with that. So now with 7% increase in the moisture content in the atmosphere per 1 degree warming, 12% increase in the lightning intensity is the quantified one. So more and more lightning impact. Orissa, we are already seeing the lightning impact maximum. Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu are seeing some early warning systems are already available, but building protection to the people who are working in open areas when daytime lightning is taking place, particularly people working in agriculture fields have to be protected from the threat of lightning. So these are some of the challenges which I have wanted to highlight for this panel discussion, so that our developmental planning and sustainability associated with the development planning can account for all these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. K.J. Ramesh. I think it was really enlightening to understand what is going to happen for the future, how we are going to prepare for ourselves for this climate change. Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Dr. Sumit Sharma, Program Officer, United Nations Environment Program. In fact, I had an opportunity to interact with him on the marine litter and marine plastic. But marine pollution also is equally important, as I mentioned, with the oxygen minimum zones which are coming up in future in many of the areas. Our oceans are going to have a serious problem in terms of oxygen, and then reduction in the fish catch, and then marine pollution. Over to you, Dr. Sumit.
Thank you, Professor Ramana. It's an opportunity. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, TERI. Thank you, World Bank. And I am an absolute misfit to this panel. They are all esteemed, prominent speakers in this field. And I'm basically a pollution person, not directly fitting into the climate resilience fraternity. But then I just tried to see this through my own lens. And I felt that other than the climate resilience part, you also need to be wary about the local pollution, the local environment, and need to be more resilient about these things, which are going to impact you more immediately. And I'm absolutely not undermining the long-term impacts of climate, which all my eminent fellow panelists are going to speak about. So coasts, when I see them, there are 3-4 things which come to my mind. One is the fragileness of the ecosystem. That immediately comes to my mind whenever you see those pristine, clean beaches and the Western Ghats and Eastern Ghats, those pristineness, the sensitivity around those things comes to your mind. The population which is living there is humongous. People love living near to the coasts. But more importantly, the tourism and the tourist population, which comes over and above the population which is living there, puts humongous, extraneous pressures on the limited resources which are available on the coasts. And this is what I've worked on a number of projects at Goa. This is what we have observed, that the tourist population is almost double of the residing population in Goa. And that puts a lot of pressure on the resources. And that brings a lot of environmental pressures. And I've always said this, that One, of course, coastal regions are generating their own environmental pressures and enhancing their environmental footprints. But they're also conduits to the problems, transferred from the upstream areas to the marine environments. They are exactly in between those upstream areas which are putting all those environmental degrading material, whether in the form of plastics, pollution, and all those things, and they're passing through coastal regions and then entering the marine environment and causing damage there. So they are putting coastal regions to extra risks. Now, there are a variety of pollution aspects I can touch upon, and plastics these days is my favorite. And Karina is always already smiling because we are working with the Norwegians here, India-Norway Marine Pollution Initiative, a big bilateral initiative between the two governments. And why? Because plastics has become a major issue, not just in Delhi, not just in India, but globally. Last Feb, member states, 170 odd countries came together to sign a resolution at the United Nations Environment Assembly, and coming together to make a commitment to end plastic pollution, taking into account the whole life cycle approach. So it's not just controlling it at the tailpipe, but controlling it from where it starts. So that's the kind of enormity of the issue has come to our table, and we are trying to address that issue. In terms of why this is such a big issue, I'll go just a bit into the history of this. By now, I think there are about 9 or 10 billion tons of plastics which have been manufactured and used. And you'll be amazed to know that only 10% of it has been recycled by now. Rest, everything is lying here and there in the landfills, in the marine environment, and somewhere around us. A lot of it gets broken down into microplastics. And microplastics is something which is unfortunately entering our food chains through multiple routes, through water, through salt, through agricultural crops. And research is mind-boggling when it is telling us that 5 grams of plastics is, everyone is sort of ingesting 5 grams of plastics every week, which is equivalent to a credit card, is it just shakes my mind like anything. And we know plastics are carcinogens, they are polymeric products, and that needs to be taken care of very, very seriously. Now, why I'm telling you this is because coasts are just there. They are facing the pressures from the tourism sector, and we know tourism sector contributes heavily to the plastics contributions. I've read this somewhere that the coasts, 80% of tourism in the world happens at coasts. And that is how the linkage between the tourism plastic is sort of contributing to this whole issue. There's this recent issue also, I'm just trying to link it with the climate aspect, which Professor Ramana told me and immediately reminded me of this research, that if plastics are lying on the beaches, it heats up the level, the ground, the beach, a little more than the normal. So there will be a few more degrees of temperature if plastics are lying on the beach. So that further adds to the problem, the biodiversity on the beach and in the marine environment. Other than plastics, I can recall the effluent discharges which are happening in and around the coastal regions. And as I said, they are acting as a conduits. So the rivers flowing through the coastal environments, entering the marine environment, carrying a lot of chemicals through industrial use, through mining, which I saw in Goa happening at a very rampant level. They enter the marine environment with the marine discharges. A lot of industries have a belief that if they discharge their stuff deep down into the marine, is never going to come back. But that's not true. Well, you have seen that a lot of this material comes back to the beaches. And in fact, even if it doesn't come back, a lot of aquatic life, which is there in the sea, is ingesting those chemicals, those plastics, microplastics. And we know our food chain is linked to all those, seafood kind of things. Air pollution, my favorite subject. I'll just touch one small thing. Although coastal areas are not so much polluted if you compare it with Delhi and Bangalore's, but if you see I mean, I can again quote Goa. If you see the levels in January, I will not link it to meteorology. In January in Delhi, it's all because of meteorology. But in Goa, you see a spike in January where the temperatures are almost moderate all across the year. You're bound to link it with activities happening during January. And you know what I'm talking about. So there are all these extra pressures we are putting through the sectors like tourism on the coastal regions, which are increasing the environmental footprint. And it is now utmost important that we start thinking about making resilient strategies to make our coastal regions protective enough to tackle these problems. And of course, climate resilience is very, very important. But these are the things which can make our coastal regions more resilient, more protected. And I'm sure it is also linked to the long-term sustainability of these regions also. Because, and I can quote Dr. Swati Kwatra, she's sitting here. We've seen her PhD research. This is what the research told us, that Goa is doing so well socioeconomically, but the environmental leg is weakening every day. And if you see the long-term sustainability of things, unless you take care of this environmental leg, the overall sustainability, and she tried to quantify the sustainability, is expected to go down in the longer run. And I don't think any Goan, any coastal community would like this to happen. And that's why the importance of bringing environmental resilience in the coastal regions is something which I'm trying to put up on the table. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Dr. Sumit, for connecting it. Polish now it is important because the health of the coastal ecosystem is dependent on how good we maintain. In fact, we need a good coastal ecosystem for the climate and sustainability, but pollution is also equally important for that. Thank you, Dr. Sumit. We have a next panelist, Ms. Riya Rahman. She is basically going to talk on island states. In fact, last week with Karina, we have been in Lakshadweep Island. We know how critical they are in terms of, especially Andaman Islands, we may not have much problem. But when it comes to the Lakshadweep, since they are just 1 meter above the sea level, it can be Mauritius or Maldives, whatever it may be. I think her inputs will be really useful for this discussion.
Yeah.
You.
Thank you, Professor Ramana. And again, I would like to thank World Bank and TERI for inviting me for this very important session. So while there's been a lot of discussion on the need for resilience, I'm sure I don't need to stress on that. But as I am coming from CDRI, the Coalition of Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, I thought it is important to bring in the link on infrastructure. Anup stressed on the impact, for example, Cyclone Fani had on the power infrastructure and the time it took to restore. So I thought it would be important to first highlight the impact that extreme events have on infrastructure. We've made considerable improvements in saving life, but the economic damage to physical infrastructure and also the indirect impacts is something that costs the GDP quite a bit. Just to stress, the Cyclone Fani, the economic damage was close to 9 billion, where the power sector accounted for 1.2 billion USD with respect to the economic damage. Then there was a severe cyclone in Fiji, Winston in 2017, where the economic damage was 1.3 billion, that is 1/3 of the GDP. Similarly, the most recent volcano and the tsunami that was there in Tonga, again, another island in the Pacific, where the economic damage was close to 90.4 million, of which the infrastructure damage itself was 20.9 million, which is 18.5% of the GDP. So I think it's very important to actually highlight here how the infrastructure damage that happens, especially in the small island developing states, it is generally more than 20% of the GDP, which is extremely falls heavy on the small island developing states. So, considering the vulnerability of small island states, CDRI has a dedicated initiative which is entirely focused on these SIDS. Across the globe, like there are 58 small island developing states, and then it's with this objective in mind, a flagship initiative was curated in 2021, where we did extensive consultations with stakeholders from small island developing states. We're trying to understand what are the key challenges are. Again, the small island development states being extremely small, they have weak governance systems, they have issues with economies of scales, not having access to global markets. All of these add to their challenges, and obviously the impact of climate change basically compounding their challenges. So through co-curation process where, CDRI, we did extensive consultations across islands from the Pacific, Caribbean, and the Indian Ocean island states. And also we had a lot of donors also coming into the space with UK, Japan, US, Australia also being very much part of the consultations. And with almost a year long of consultations, we actually designed this initiative called IRIS, which is Infrastructure for Resilient Island States. I've been very lucky to be part of this initiative from the very beginning, and it was launched at COP26 at Glasgow by the Prime Minister of India, along with other 5 Prime Ministers, which is Australia, India, Jamaica, Mauritius, and Fiji. Post that, we got into the inception stage, and again, through extensive consultations, we tried to understand what were the key challenges and the opportunities for mainstreaming resilience and for infrastructure developments. And one of the key themes that emerged definitely was early warning systems. Early warning systems, specifically with respect to being seen as an infrastructure itself, for institutionalizing early warning systems. They did not have data systems in place. Again, data management systems came out as a strong challenge that the small island developing states were facing. Again, in the context of early warning systems, there was a key need for strengthening capacities, the communication capacities. So here, I would like to again highlight, there are a lot of efforts being done with respect to communicating alerts or information to the people, but how do you actually bring out the link to infrastructure? That's something that's totally missing. So that's the kind of link that CDRI is trying to bring on. Like, for example, there should be early warning systems which a power utility manager should be able to access and know, okay, these are the extreme heat days or the extreme temperature that is anticipated, and accordingly, they tweak their power distribution. So these are some of the things we are trying to do through CDRI. Now, again, coming back to IRIS, we announced a call for proposal, considering there were a lot of requests and challenges from the different small island developing states. So this call for proposal focused on 4 main themes. Again, these themes came out from the consultations we did. We did go to islands like the Fiji, the Dominican Republic, where we did extensive regional consultations. So the 4 themes that emerged were risk-informed planning, database management systems, access to finance, and also mainstreaming inclusion and the gender and social and disability inclusion in infrastructure access. Now, that was one layer of the call for proposal, but again, the focus being on infrastructure, we had 8 critical sectors which IRIS focused on, which is the 3 critical structures, which is power, transport, and telecommunication for sure. But we also had a lot of focus and a lot of support the island states needed with respect to tourism infrastructure, coastal infrastructure, water, wastewater, and also tourism, and also early warning systems and ICT. So based on this call was put out, and we've got an overwhelming response from about 30 small island developing states spread across all of these themes, which clearly shows there is a need. Like, early warning systems again has come out as a major need, especially with respect to institutionalizing it, setting up early warning systems, the whole architecture of starting from the risk knowledge with respect to dissemination and finally reaching for decision-making processes. So this is largely what IRIS looks like, and the focus on IRIS is definitely to empower the small island developing states so that they can integrate resilience into the development. So there's a large focus on inclusion as well, because finally infrastructure is for the people. So the access of infrastructure will only be truly resilient. It will be resilient only if the gender and the social aspects are incorporated. So again, a lot of emphasis on how there's a need to look at indigenous, locally led adaptation solutions for enhancing resilience, the need for skilled labor. Again, there was a strong emergence of a topic on how they didn't have skilled laborers, how there's a need of academic courses within the islands, which actually integrated disaster resilient infrastructure. So there were a lot of topics. So that's exactly the reason why we've kept the call for proposal very comprehensive to accommodate all of these requests that came from the small island developing states. Now we are in the process of evaluating these applications, and the idea is to award projects through CDRI's multi-donor trust fund, which has about 50 million USD entirely focused on enhancing resilience of infrastructure. Apart from that, coming to the space, again, back to what we're majorly doing in the Indian states, like we have a project with the Odisha state government where we're working on the power sector. And here the objective was to understand and assess the disaster preparedness of power infrastructure and practitioners and their risk mapping. And this study has been quite extensive, where we actually mapped out what are the different, the whole transmission and distribution infrastructure, especially with regards to the number of poles, the distribution lines, all of that which fall in the critical infrastructure region. So when I say critical, there are several factors we've looked at, especially with respect to the distance from the coast, the vulnerability, the damage that, especially with respect to Cyclone Fanny, the transmission and distribution infrastructure had. So this is the kind of mapping we've done, where we come up with an infrastructure inventory of this transmission and distribution infrastructure. So I think I'll stop here. These are some of the key initiatives. There's a lot more I could speak on of other CDRI initiatives we are having, but I think in the context of this panel, these are the two initiatives I would like to highlight from CDRI's end, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Priya, for highlighting the need of infrastructure in the case of disaster. In fact, especially on the mainland as well as in the island. One example which I think you have been telling, when there was a Woki cyclone, almost Lakshadweep and Maldives were completely affected by that. Then water has to go from Lakshadweep to Maldives. So these infrastructure takes a very important role, especially during a disaster. Thank you, Riya. Maybe I think with the permission, I think Mr. Anup has already talked on that. He was advising me, we'll go to the next speaker, Mr. Ignacio. In fact, I had an opportunity to work with him. Maybe you may remember or not, coastal resilience for developing new and innovative approaches in India and Bangladesh along the Bay of Bengal. This was a project which I worked maybe I think 2 years back, 3 years back. Over to you, Raghunath.
Thank you very much, Nan. Of course, I remember the work that we did together, and thank you very much to everyone for inviting me. So I'm going to focus on a few points emerging from our work in Bangladesh, and this is also similar to the work that we did together with extensive consultations and analytical work. And the objective of this report, which was recently launched, it's called Bangladesh Coastal Resilience in a Changing Climate, was to look at the past interventions, see what worked, what didn't work, what could work better, looking at the current state of interventions in Bangladesh, but also globally, and then look at the trends in both in the risk, but also in the types of solutions and interventions into the future. And the book concludes with 7 recommendations, out of which I'm going to discuss 3 of them today. And again, some of them already sort of been introduced by some of the other panelists. So let me just dive right into it. And the first one is something that Dr. Ramesh, I think you brought it up, which is the first point is that you have to understand the level of risk within an understanding that coastal resilience is not an objective in itself. Coastal resilience is a need that arises from a situation in a particular coastal area. And so understanding how first is driven by the needs of the development needs and the use needs of this particular area. And so starting that from the starting point, and then that will give us the starting point to make decisions, to have conversations about what is the acceptable level of risk in this area, what is the coastal resilience objectives that are linked to that overall development objective. And understanding that this is linked to the current land use, the data, risk assessments, all of these understanding risk points that you were mentioning, those are also linked, the level of understanding that we need to have is also linked to the uses that we have and the level of risk that we're trying to manage. And this goes to some of the examples that we have in the report that are, how is this risk-based decision-making model used in other places, in other countries, and giving very practical examples on how this is done. And these, for example, in Bangladesh, those principles are already being sort of brought forward in what, I don't know if you're familiar with, but they have the Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100. So these sort of adaptable delta planning, its principles are already there. And now the challenge is how do you bring them down to implementation? So that brings it to the second point, which is how do we work in having more flexible approaches to coastal resilience? We have a lot of examples in the book from not only government interventions, but also community-based interventions. What you was also mentioned about these locally led adaptation measures, both in terms of beach nourishment, erosion control, and a lot of about using natural processes. But we also understand that these take time. These are very site-specific. And even with the very state-of-the-art data and modeling, we also understand that, for example, in the Bay of Bengal being such a dynamic environment, but this also applies to many other places, we do have to find ways of having projects and programs that allow for interventions that are flexible and that can very quickly adapt to the results that we're seeing on the ground and the risks that we're seeing on the ground. And unfortunately, this goes both for governments and also financing institutions like the World Bank. Our current systems are not very suitable for these types of interventions. We all want all the feasibility studies, all the reports, all the investments, all the procurement plan, everything. And all of this takes time. And we've seen this in projects in Bangladesh, for example, that it's taking us 2 or 3 or 4 years to prepare. By the time shovel gets on the ground, a lot of these dynamics and the physical environment has changed. And then to have a modification or to have a revision, it takes a lot of time also from the government, from us. So we really need to think that in a changing climate, in these environments, we really need to work towards how do we have systems and processes that are fit for purpose and that allow this more sort of flexible and experimental approach. And that is also very much linked to our ability to being able to use nature-based solutions and nature processes on these things. And then this also links to the point on governance that was raised at the beginning. And the final point is on what we found as a success factor is that where we see more success is when the interventions on coastal resilience are linked to multiple benefits. So when an intervention, say for coastal resilience near an urban environment, is linked to urban services or urban rejuvenation or recreation spaces, that really allows the community to take advantage of the space. There's economic activity. There's a lot of things that communities value, and then that community value also brings political pressure and also brings a lot of attention to maintaining some of these spaces. These same things is on what it was mentioning as well for beach nourishment and the use of beach spaces for recreation, for tourism, and also for other economic activities such as fisheries, ports, and others. So really linking the protection investments with the multiple uses. And of course, this also links to other uses that comes with ecosystem services such as mangroves. So really thinking that how do we design our coastal interventions with multiple benefits in mind, and linking also how can this help us on one of the big challenges that we have in Bangladesh, but also in many other places, which is operation and maintenance and mobilizing private financing. So really having these multiple uses and these multiple approaches can help bring in private sector to support with the operation and maintenance, and in some cases even support with some of the capital expenditures if we can link it to, say, increasing land values and increasing economic value of the land that we are protecting. So I think that those are my 2 cents to the conversation. And again, I'm very happy to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ignacio. And Director, you highlighted a very important point from the study of this coastal resilience in terms of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based one. In fact, that was the area one where we have really put up one case as a part of this report. Pondicherry doesn't have a beach. We got the beach back, and how nature-based solution can be implemented at the India itself. In fact, the Delta Plan, which was really envisaged by the Bangladesh with World Bank support, it is one of the area where we could not only protect from the extreme event storm surges, but also it will be useful for the agriculture. These are all the one of the multi-purpose projects which has been envisaged at Bangladesh. Thank you, Ignacy. Again. I think now we have come to the completion of all the remarks by the panel members. I think it is better to have a question and answer section from the members, because it is not good to speak from our side, but better to listen from your side and then comment on that. Any questions? Yeah.
Saw with interest your presentation. I was thinking that there will be something, you showed that tower which gives signals about 20 kilometers so that the fishermen are warned. Then you showed in another slide where some buildings are constructed for evacuation purpose. Here you said. They said that the people will be evacuated and they will be put up there for a couple of days. So I wanted to know whether it was an idiom or they were literally put up only for 2 days.
Or they literally put forward.
Actually, sir, you said that in case of a calamity, the people will be evacuated and put up in these buildings for a couple of days. So actually, I was curious whether it is an idiom, couple of days, or it is literal, 2 days.
No, let me tell you how some of these events occur. So this is from our experience from Odisha and Andhra and some of the places. Lastly, we have also seen evacuation happening in Gujarat and Maharashtra when the recent cyclones, especially Cyclone Taute, also had happened. So if you look at Cyclone Taute, the phenomena started long back. It started, I think, starting from Kerala and it went all towards the coast. This was one cyclone which was grazing through the coastline. It really did not enter anywhere. Now, how the state governments, take actions. They look at this event. They are being warned. The state is putting, the required administration to look into doing evacuation, depending on the information that is shared by the technical agencies.
So it was tentative.
So they will use that information and look in terms of whether there is a potential landfall, whether there is a potential flood, and if that is an area which is going to get impacted, so those people are essentially to be moved. Now, when they move, it will also depend in terms of what is the kind of, intensity of the event, and what is it really going to manifest in terms of just wind, or is it flood, or is it combination of these things. So that is a decision that the state government will take depending on the event.
There is another relevant question I wanted to know, because you are the most pertinent person right now. After the cyclone, after a couple of years of cyclone, I visited Chennai to East Coast Road. There is a holy place in
ECR, you visited
ECR. I drove a car for 2 hours and I saw everyone who is building a house had a different wind level. One person had a 2 feet, 1 3 feet, one gentleman had a complete story. So I actually, because I am in the same profession, so I was very disturbed to see that nobody advised them actually what should be they prepared for. Everyone is doing as per his own will. Secondly, sir, the slide you showed, in which actually the buildings were constructed, I think they are supported by World Bank. So, but they are not resilient to this kind of calamity. The soft story collapse syndrome is there in that also. They are just ordinary buildings, all of them. No building has been constructed for that purpose. Actually, incidentally, I wanted to tell. Secondly, as a disaster management person, I too dealt in it for some years. I was expecting that there would be a slide in which you would show that this is the signal they are getting, because some people are there deep in 10 to 12 days of sailing, especially beyond the Chennai beach, Marina Beach. The sailor, the ordinary dinghy boats go for 10 days. That is stress. So how would they be informed? How would they be evacuated? Where they would be put up and when they would be released? This could be there in one slide. That would have been better. Anyway, so that's all, sir. Dr. K.J. Ramesh, sir, I have one humble question from you, sir. Sir, actually you said that during the cyclone, there is 100 mm rainfall. So, sir, actually I wanted to clarify for my own purpose, whether it is per hour.
Yes, it could, intensities could be 10 centimeters per hour. Yes.
Per hour.
Rain rate. Yes. Already we are seeing 80 centimeters in a day in several cyclones.
No,
So,
actually,
future cyclones will have definitely 10 centimeters per hour intensity. So we have to build resilience, keeping that kind of intensities in mind. That's what I flagged.
there is a perception. There is a perception, sir.
No perception, because rainfall holding capacity, water holding capacity of the atmosphere has increased. So you will get much more intense rainfall events in future. There's no perception here.
Okay, sir. 100 mm per hour. Okay, sir. And one, Mr. Can I?
Yeah, yes.
What's your good name? Sandeep. No. Sumit. Actually, you touched a very pertinent question, because when I used to visit from Elephanta Caves to Colaba and Gateway of India, then from Gateway of India, there would be clear sea after 1 kilometer or so. And now, actually, up to the Elephanta, there is all spillover from ships, and actually there are ships everywhere. There is plastic, and the trouble is that the maximum colony of fisheries are there in Colaba. So if you take this problem with reference to Maria Beach, then it is different. But if you take it to Bombay, then in Bombay it is horrible. So actually there you should categorize in 4 or 5 categories. In the first category should be the highly dense population, where the entire fishermen are living and they are consuming the produce. However aquatically poor they may be, but actually they are catching it and they are selling it and people are consuming it. So I think there would be some 4 or 5 categories. In the first category that will be, and in the last category there can be Kanyakumari and Andaman and other things. Thank you.
I'll just take one quick response on the point that you touched on the early warning system for the fishes. I think I'll separately discuss with you, because the system is very complex. I'll share a separate slide with you, I think, after the session. On the point that you talked on the housing, I just want to make a point that all the houses that are built under the project are certified, tested, and the designs are approved as a multi-hazard unit. These are those social housing, the small houses. But when it comes to evacuation shelters, which are MPCS, so did not mention everything to you in the detail, but if you look at Gujarat buildings, they're all on stilt, but they're also designed for tsunami impact. So in fact, a lot of tsunami has not happened recently, but when you look at the design, it is actually designed, there are shear walls, etc. The ones what you've seen in Chennai, I don't know which building, but most of the buildings that was built under the financing to the bank, especially on the cyclone shelters, I mean, most of them are also used as schools. We did not allow a lot of soft story construction to be actually done under the project. So there are 3 or 4 generation of buildings along the coastline. What we're doing right now under the next generation project is to pick up those existing weak structures, which are soft story, which are a lot of, which are dilapidated, continue to be used as shelters, and looking at refurbishment only through a structural analysis. So that is being attempted as a new generation program that we're designing now with the NDMA.
I think you were asking about the pollution, which I will tell you, you can get that information from there. What exactly you asked is, all along the Indian coast, we monitor the coastal pollution. If you see between 0 to 1 kilometer, where urban cities are there is a high concentration. That is also, if you see immediately after the monsoon, you might have seen Marina. Yes. Next day of the first spell of monsoon, you will see very bad water, because all these estuaries dump the waste into the sea. Then after minimum 1 week time, everything will become normal due to dilution of sea. And if you go away from the 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, there will be reduction. And then further 2 kilometers, you don't have any problem with the pollution. So this classification is already available. If you visit the site of NCCR, you will get updated information, automatic buoy, which is deployed at many places.
So actually, every year, almost every year, I visit Colaba. So actually, the Colaba thing is way.
It is basically because of sewage. It is because of sewage.
Comparison to Colaba, in fact,
You are right.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Swam Prabha. I'm a consultant to DG20 Secretariat at the moment. And this actually builds in very closely and very pertinently to building a resilient and sustainable blue economy that we have been talking about. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences and expertise here. Just two very quick questions, because we also have started a new working group within G20 on DRR. And there were two questions and two segments, themes that has come up. One is on the financing. So if any of you, it's an open question, that what could be innovative financing where the private sector is also coming in? Because we see here, I feel it's a lot of public sector financing that has been talked about and is being pulled in. So what is the private sector funding that is coming in? And also on sharing best practices, we have World Bank, we have UNEP, and you have experiences and expertise that flows from other countries as well. So how do you think that also builds into kind of strengthen or build up the work that we are doing here in the country? And the third thing is within the infrastructure, you talked about housing. Are we also talking about the ports and the jetties, which are very fragile, and these are like uprooted like trees in no time, and it's the cyclone intensity is very high. So how do you build in these building codes and building standards for ports, jetties, and other infrastructures going beyond housing? Thank you so much.
I think I will answer the second, and then I will ask both of them to answer on the first question related to finance, because they are the people to answer. When it comes to the ports, earlier, because I'm part of the BAS for 4651 for the port infrastructure. Right now, all the structures now we are designing it for the extreme events. Two aspects. One is extreme water level, and other one is the extreme wind. Both have been taken care, and then these BAS codes are being revised for the new standards. If you see on the return period for the many of the structures, what we call it as a 100-year or 15-year and all, it is only statistical analysis. What you need is earlier data. We don't have that kind of events. In the present case, your increased event, your return period also will high. Earlier, a return period for design is, let us say, for 3 meters. Now it becomes 5 meters. Now all these codes are part of that, and it is being addressed. I will hand over to them for the finance.
Just one question. Like, what has been done on the earlier ports? How are they being transformed? And the whole transition is happening on the port sector with the older ports.
What we are doing it for many ports is there are two approaches for it. If the new ports are being, these ports have been taken. For the existing ports, we have a rehabilitation is a part of that, and then there is augmentation to the existing ports which to be strengthened as a part of that. And this particular port covers the rehabilitation also. Retrofitting, what we call it as.
Yeah.
I'm not a finance person, but I can still attempt answering your question. So on the front of the bank, we have a risk financing team which actually works on this. So there is a whole portfolio in the bank, and with IFC, we have worked a bit with NDMA on this issue, looking at the experiences drawn from Mexico. The Fonden, which is one of the instruments that is used there, the Turkish catastrophic insurance pool. There is one which is being now developed in the Philippines. There is another facility called Sandrif, which actually looks in terms of pooling the risk. The whole idea here is to look in terms of what I just showed you in the beginning in terms of the risk information, and how do you combine the multi-hazard information to look in terms of what are those extreme events and what is the kind of catastrophic pool that you can actually create by bringing in member states or by bringing in a couple of states together. So what we have discussed so far with NDMA, and this is a project which is or a study which is actually being commissioned under the Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project, which is managed at NDMA, is to do a kind of a comprehensive risk financing strategy. So in the process, what we have done is looked at 4 states. We have taken up Uttarakhand because Uttarakhand has got one of the most advanced risk assessment system in the country, where they have done a good amount of analysis of all infrastructure classes and the kind of impact it can have. Because unless you get that level of detail, it becomes very, very difficult to look in terms of what is the delta, what is the money you're actually targeting. Because for an earthquake, the behavior of a particular infrastructure is very different from that of a flood, because you may have to really replace the asset. So that kind of quantification has led to bringing in Uttarakhand as a state for doing this assessment. We have Kerala, then we have Odisha, and we have Gujarat. These 4 states have been taken as a kind of a study, and that results are yet to come out. What I would definitely say is that the final tool will actually is not going to be uniform across all the 4 states, but it can be insurance, it can be some other processes, and this is something which is still being decided and worked out, where the results are being discussed in terms of whether we need to look at insurance itself as a tool, or we need to look at some other products. The market is actually filled with a lot of products. The whole idea is that as a country and as a state, what is it that they want to choose? Second option is to see whether 4 states who are having typical amount of risk, I mean, say for example Odisha.
You have Andhra Pradesh. They have been repeatedly getting engaged with cyclones. Now, is there a way that we can bring these two states and look in kind of a product where they can look at cost sharing options and things like that? So that's just a very rudimentary answer. But I can actually share with you some more information in terms of how this outputs are getting generated. Thank you.
So I just wanted to touch upon both the finance aspect and the port. So the financing, again, Anup mentioned about certain innovative mechanisms and tools. Again, through IRIS initiative, access to finance was something that came out as a pressing challenge for the island states. So it's through the IRIS platform, we are looking at connecting the small island developing states to innovative mechanisms and having organizations actually also coming on board to kind of provide them those services. Not just about these innovative tools or financial mechanisms being placed. The challenge starts from, even starting with writing a proposal, for example, if they want to access a GCF fund or a GF fund. So that's the kind of capacity that they don't have. So that's the kind of hand-holding or the strengthening of capacity that we are looking to provide through IRIS. Again, it can't be done through one organization, hence using the network of CDRI of 39 members and trying to see how can that kind of capacity be provided. And also now coming to the point of ports, again, especially in the context of SIDS, both seaports and airports are the major connectivity areas. So there's a lot of work that's happening proactively by the government itself with trying to make the port more resilient. Again, there is a whole aspect related to ports because there's a huge amount of livelihoods also associated with it. So there are a lot of initiatives. For example, when we went to the Dominican Republic, the Port Authority were doing a lot of initiatives with respect to ensuring the livelihoods around the ports were, actually preserved. Both the fishermen and the women, again, bringing in the whole gender angle to it. And also there's a lot of stress being done with respect to tackling environmental marine pollution because electric motors or the carburetors are two-stroke engines right now. So they're looking at having four-stroke engines being in place. So there are a lot of things where, both adaptation and mitigation are being looked with respect to making the port more resilient. Again, standards is something which is being looked. There are networks both in the Pacific and the Caribbean. For example, we have the network called CROSOC, which is the CARICOM regional organization for standards and quality. They are looking at, redefining and revising the standard for infrastructure, building codes. Similarly, Pacific is doing a large project with ADB on looking at the standards for infrastructure in general. So I just wanted to put out there's a lot happening in this space, and especially in the context of SIDS, the seaport becomes a critical avenue for connectivity. Hence, especially with respect to when there is a requirement for aid to be deployed in the event of an extreme event. Again, in the case of Tonga, when it was hit by the volcano and the tsunami, the aid could not be reached because both the airport and the seaport were damaged. So these are some of the things that, they actually qualify as critical infrastructure, transport, power, and telecom for that matter. Thank you.
No, I think we have come to the final stage. I think she is already looking at me. We already exceeded the time. So to quickly conclude, I think we have a first presenter from Dr. KJ Ramesh, who talked about basically on the moisturizing factor, impact-based forecasting. How do we meet future challenges due to climate change, especially on the flooding when we have high rainfall. In fact, at this place, he has also mentioned about intensity and duration. Earlier, we used to have a same intensity, it is to spread over 1 week, but now entire intensity is coming in a short duration. That makes more complex in the system of handling this disaster further. I think the first bit, I think I missed it with Anup. I think he has said the context very rightly in terms of his presentation, bank activities and what are all the lessons learned from the various projects which bank is handling on the both in India as well as abroad. How he could able to successfully demonstrate many things on the Indian coast. And then we have a third panelist from Dr. Sumit. He's talked about, though it is not directly related to the coastal resilience, but indirectly, if you see the sustainable development, the ecosystem plays an important role. And then that's how you asked the question about marine pollution, which plays an important role for the coastal ecosystem. And Mr. Riya has talked both on the infrastructure development for the island countries as well as mainland, how do we involve the local population in terms of developing systems, and also the infrastructure is very important. Either it can be power or transport or water, especially during the disasters. And last, we have a colleague from Bangladesh, and then he has highlighted about a success story of the Bangladesh, how they could able to manage with this Delta plan and other things. At the outset, I think there are good questions from the audience also, and then lot more to be done. This is going to be a challenge for future. I thank panelists as well as World Bank and TERI for this opportunity. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Murthy, for giving the concluding remarks and the closing remarks. And thank you to all the speakers for joining today. And thank you to the speakers for joining online as well. It was a very splendid session with such great dignitaries. And with this, we come to an end of this session. And the next session, which will be at this hall, is on nature-based solutions for sustainable development. It is scheduled at 4 p.m. Otherwise, for all the other sessions which are happening parallelly, you can check the WSDS website for that. Thank you so much once again. And I request all the speakers to maybe stand here and we can have a group photo.